The bullet shattered the glass bottle before the sheriff's finger even twitched on the trigger, and every man in the square of St. Louis, Missouri, turned to stare at the woman who had just outshot their lawman in front of half the town. Lily Catherine stood with her rifle still raised, smoke curling from the barrel, her dark hair whipping in the hot August wind of 1873. She had not meant to show up Sheriff Coleman like that. Truly she had not. But when he had been bragging loud enough for the whole street to hear about how no woman could ever match a man's aim, something in her chest had tightened with familiar anger. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, and in the 6 years since his death, that rifle had kept her, and her younger brother fed through harder times than she cared to remember. "Well, I will be," someone muttered from the crowd. Sheriff Coleman's face had gone red as a summer sunset. He was a proud man, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with a mustache he waxed every morning. "Luck," he declared, loud enough to carry. "Pure fool's luck." Lily lowered her rifle slowly. "Set up another bottle, then." The sheriff's jaw worked, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife through warm butter. "I would be happy to set up 6 bottles if the lady is willing to demonstrate again." The crowd parted for him, this stranger with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of winter sky. He was tall and lean, with the look of a man who spent more time in the saddle than out of it. His hat was dusty from travel, his boots worn but well kept, and there was something in the way he moved that spoke of careful awareness, the kind of man who noted every exit and every threat without seeming to look at all. Lily felt her breath catch slightly, then cursed herself for it. She was 24 years old and had no time for foolish reactions to handsome strangers. "And who might you be?" Sheriff Coleman demanded, clearly grateful for any interruption that might shift attention from his humiliation. "Kieran Zachary," the stranger said, tipping his hat with a slight smile. "Just rode in from Kansas, looking for work and a place to rest my horse for a spell." "We do not need drifters," the sheriff said flatly. "Perhaps not," Kieran replied, his tone easy and unbothered. "But I surely do need to see this shooting again, because what I just witnessed was the finest marksmanship I have seen in 5 years of riding from Texas to Montana and back again." Lily felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. It was just one shot. "One shot that counted," Kieran said, turning those winter sky eyes fully on her. "Most folks take 3 tries to hit what you hit on the first go, and you made it look easier than breathing." Sheriff Coleman made a disgusted sound and stalked away, muttering about needing to check on some matter at the jail. The crowd began to disperse, though plenty of folks cast curious glances back at Lily and the stranger. She became acutely aware that they were now standing alone in the middle of the dusty street, and that her brother Samuel would be wondering where she had gone with the supplies she was meant to be purchasing. "I appreciate the compliment," Lily said carefully, "but I should be getting on with my errands." "Of course," Kieran said, but he fell into step beside her as she headed toward the general store. "I meant what I said, though. That was exceptional shooting. Your father teach you?" She glanced at him sharply. "What makes you think it was my father?" "The way you hold the rifle," he said. "Careful, respectful, like someone taught you it was a tool to be honored, not just a weapon. That is usually a father's teaching, or maybe a grandfather's." Lily felt something loosen in her chest. "He did. Died when I was 18. Since then it has been just me and my brother." "I am sorry for your loss," Kieran said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her believe him. "A man who teaches his daughter to shoot like that must have been something special." "He was," Lily said quietly. Then, because she did not want to dwell on old grief, she changed the subject. "You said you were looking for work. What kind of work?" "Anything honest," Kieran replied. I have done ranch work, cattle drives, even some carpentry when the opportunity arose. I am not particular as long as the pay is fair and the work does not involve stealing or cheating. They had reached the general store, and Lily paused at the steps. Samuel was probably already wondering what had taken her so long, and she still needed to get flour and sugar and beans. But something made her hesitate, some instinct she could not quite name. "Can you track?" she asked suddenly. Kieran's eyebrows rose. "Well enough. Why do you ask?" Lily bit her lip, weighing whether to trust this stranger with information she had not even shared with the sheriff. But Sheriff Coleman was a fool and a braggart, and something told her this quiet man with the careful eyes might actually be able to help where the law had failed. "Someone has been stealing our cattle," she said in a low voice. "Not many, just 1 or 2 head every few weeks, but we cannot afford to lose any more. The sheriff says he will look into it when he has time, but he never seems to have time for problems on a ranch run by a woman and a 16-year-old boy." Kieran's expression hardened slightly. "How long has this been going on?" "3 months now," Lily admitted. "We have lost 8 head total. Samuel and I have tried to track whoever is doing it, but they are clever. They take the cattle during storms or on moonless nights, and they cover their tracks well." "And you are asking if I can help," Kieran said slowly. "I am asking if you want a job," Lily corrected. "We cannot pay much, but we can offer room and board and a fair wage for ranch work. And if you can help us figure out who is stealing from us, there would be a bonus in it." Kieran studied her for a long moment, and Lily found she could not quite read his expression. Then he smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth that somehow transformed his whole face. "I need a partner exactly like you," he said, almost wonderingly. "Someone who can shoot straight and think clearly and is not afraid to ask for help when it is needed. Yes, Miss Catherine, I accept your offer." They shook hands there on the steps of the general store, and Lily tried to ignore the warmth that spread through her at the contact. This was business, she told herself firmly. Just business and nothing more. Samuel was suspicious of Kieran from the first moment they met. Lily's younger brother had his father's dark hair and serious eyes, and he had taken on the responsibility of protecting his sister with the fierce determination of someone who had grown up too fast. When Lily brought Kieran back to the ranch that evening, Samuel met them in the yard with his rifle in hand and a scowl on his face. "Who is this?" Samuel demanded. "Our new ranch hand," Lily said calmly, sliding down from her horse. "Kieran Zachary, this is my brother Samuel." "Samuel, put the rifle down before you shoot someone by accident." "I do not shoot by accident," Samuel muttered, but he lowered the weapon. "We do not need a ranch hand. We need help tracking whoever is stealing our cattle," Lily said. "And Mr. Zachary has experience with that kind of work." Samuel's scowl deepened, but he could not argue with the logic. They had been struggling to keep up with the ranch work while also trying to catch the thieves, and exhaustion had been wearing on both of them. "He can have the spare room in the bunkhouse," Samuel said finally. "But I am watching you," he added, glaring at Kieran. "I would expect nothing less," Kieran said mildly. "If I had a sister as fine as Miss Catherine, I would watch any stranger like a hawk watches a snake." That seemed to mollify Samuel slightly, though he still looked suspicious as he stalked off toward the barn. Lily showed Kieran to the bunkhouse, a sturdy building her father had constructed years ago when they had employed 3 ranch hands. Now it stood mostly empty, a reminder of better times. The spare room was clean but sparse, with a bed and a trunk and a small window that looked out over the eastern pasture. "It is not much," Lily said apologetically. "It is perfect," Kieran replied, setting his saddlebags on the trunk. "I have slept in far worse places, believe me." "This is comfortable." They stood there for a moment in awkward silence, and Lily realized she was very aware of being alone with him in the close quarters of the small room. She stepped back toward the door. "Supper will be ready in about an hour," she said. "Just come up to the main house when you are settled." "Miss Catherine," Kieran said as she turned to leave, "thank you for taking a chance on a stranger." Lily looked back at him, at those winter sky eyes and the honest expression on his sun-darkened face. "Thank you for being willing to help," she said softly. "I hope I have not made a mistake." "You have not," Kieran said with quiet certainty. "I promise you that." Over the following week, Kieran proved himself worth every penny of his wages and more. He worked from dawn until dusk, mending fences and tending horses and doing all the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch running. He was patient with the animals, efficient with his time, and never complained about the work no matter how hot the sun beat down or how sore his muscles must have been. Samuel's suspicion gradually gave way to grudging respect, especially after Kieran spent an entire afternoon helping him repair the barn roof in the blazing heat without a word of complaint. Lily found herself watching Kieran more than she should, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way he spoke gently to the horses, the way he smiled at something Samuel said that made her brother actually laugh for the first time in weeks. But it was the evenings that became Lily's favorite time. After supper, when the dishes were washed and the day's work was done, the three of them would sit on the porch and talk as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kieran told stories of his travels, of cattle drives in frontier towns and the vast open spaces of the West. He spoke of Montana winters that could freeze a man solid and Texas summers that baked the ground hard as iron. He described mountains that touched the clouds and rivers so wide you could barely see the other side. Lily listened with hungry attention, aware that her own world had become so small since her father's death. The ranch, the town, the endless cycle of work and worry. Kieran's stories reminded her that there was more beyond the horizon, more to see and experience and wonder at. "Have you ever wanted to go east?" Kieran asked her one evening as they sat watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Samuel had already gone to bed, tired from a long day of work. "To the cities, you mean?" Lily shook her head. "I cannot imagine living somewhere so crowded and closed in. My father used to say that a person needed space to breathe properly, room to see the sky from edge to edge." "He sounds like he was a wise man," Kieran said. "He was," Lily agreed. Then, hesitantly, "What about you? Do you ever want to settle somewhere or do you prefer to keep moving?" Kieran was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening land. "I always thought I preferred to keep moving," he said finally. "Seemed safer that way, easier. No ties means no one to disappoint, no one to lose." He glanced at her, and even in the fading light she could see something vulnerable in his expression. "But lately, I have been wondering if maybe I was just running from something instead of moving toward anything." Lily's heart beat faster. "And now I think maybe it is time to stop running," Kieran said softly. "If I can find the right place to stop." The air between them felt charged with possibility, and Lily found she could not look away from him. But before either of them could say anything more, a distant sound made them both freeze. Cattle, lowing in distress. Kieran was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. Lily grabbed her rifle from where it leaned against the porch rail. They moved quickly and quietly toward the pasture, and even in the darkness Lily could see that several of the cattle were agitated, moving nervously away from the western edge of the property. "There," Kieran breathed, pointing. Lily saw them then, two figures on horseback moving along the fence line. One was cutting the wire while the other kept watch. Her anger flared hot and bright. These were the thieves who had been stealing from them, taking what her family could not afford to lose. Samuel. She called back toward the house. Get the sheriff. But even as the words left her mouth, the thieves spotted them. There was a shout, a flurry of movement. The one who had been cutting the fence grabbed for his gun. Get down. Kieran shouted, and suddenly he was pulling Lily behind the water trough as a shot rang out. Lily's training took over. She steadied her rifle against the edge of the trough and fired, deliberately aiming high. The bullet sparked off a rock near the thieves' horses, and the animals reared in panic. One of the thieves cursed loudly, fighting to control his mount. Kieran fired as well, and this time one of the thieves yelped in pain. Not a killing shot, Lily realized, but enough to send them fleeing into the darkness. The sound of hoofbeats faded quickly, and then there was only the agitated lowing of the cattle and the pounding of Lily's own heart. "Are you hurt?" Kieran asked urgently, his hands on her shoulders as he looked her over. "I am fine," Lily managed, though her hands were shaking with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "Are you fine?" Kieran confirmed. Then Samuel was there, rifle in hand and eyes wide with alarm. "What happened? I heard shots. The thieves," Lily said, forcing her voice to steady. "They were here, cutting the fence. We drove them off, but they got away." Samuel's face went hard with anger. "Did you see who they were?" "Too dark," Kieran said, but he was frowning thoughtfully. "But I winged one of them. He will have a bullet wound to tend to, probably in the shoulder or arm. That should help narrow down who we are looking for." They spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch, but the thieves did not return. When morning came, Kieran examined the fence line carefully, studying the tracks in the soft earth. Lily watched him work, impressed by his methodical thoroughness. "They came from the west," Kieran said finally. "And they were riding shod horses, well-maintained, not wild mustangs or ranch horses that have been worked hard. These were animals that someone has been taking care of." "So not drifters or desperados," Lily said slowly. "No," Kieran agreed grimly. "These are locals, people with resources and knowledge of your property." That realization sat like a stone in Lily's stomach as they rode into town later that morning to report the incident to Sheriff Coleman. The lawman listened to their account with a skeptical expression, his feet propped up on his desk. "And you say you did not get a good look at them?" Coleman said when they had finished. "It was dark," Lily said, fighting to keep the frustration out of her voice. "But Mr. Zachary wounded one of them. If you look for a man with a fresh bullet wound, that should help identify them." Coleman snorted. "Miss Catherine, do you know how many men in this territory have bullet wounds? Half the cowboys I know have been shot at some point or another." "That is hardly evidence." "It is evidence if the wound is fresh," Kieran said, and there was an edge to his voice that made the sheriff sit up straighter. "And it is evidence when combined with the tracks we found and the timing of the theft attempt. This was not a random crime, Sheriff. This was planned and deliberate." "I will look into it," Coleman said dismissively. "When I have time." They left the sheriff's office with nothing accomplished, and Lily felt her anger building like a summer storm. This was exactly what she had feared, exactly why she had not bothered reporting the thefts more aggressively. The sheriff did not take her seriously because she was a woman, and he would not investigate properly because he did not think her problems mattered. "We will catch them ourselves," Kieran said as they rode back toward the ranch. "We know they are locals now, and we know one of them is wounded. We just need to watch and wait for them to make another move." "They might not come back," Lily said. "Not after last night." "Oh, they will come back," Kieran said with certainty. "Men like that, they do not like being thwarted, and they do not like that you hurt one of them. They will want revenge, which means they will get sloppy." He was right. 3 days later, Lily was in town buying supplies when she overheard two men talking outside the saloon. One of them had his arm in a sling, and he was complaining loudly about having been shot by some careless fool during a hunting accident. "Damned rifle misfired," the man was saying. "Nearly took my whole arm off." Lily felt her pulse quicken. She knew that voice. It belonged to Jake Morrison, one of the ranch hands who worked for the Halstead Spread, the largest ranch in the county. The Halsteads had been trying to buy her land for years, ever since her father died, but Lily had always refused to sell. She forced herself to walk past casually, but her mind was racing. If Morrison worked for the Halsteads, and Morrison was one of the thieves, then the Halsteads were almost certainly behind the cattle theft. They were trying to drive her out, to force her to sell by making the ranch unprofitable. Lily found Kieran at the livery stable, checking on their horses. She told him quietly what she had overheard, watching his expression darken with anger. "The Halsteads," he said slowly. "Samuel mentioned them to me, said they have been pressuring you to sell." "For 2 years now," Lily confirmed. "Edmund Halstead made an offer right after my father's funeral. Can you imagine? We had not even finished burying him, and Halstead was already trying to take our land." "We need proof," Kieran said. "Real proof, not just Morrison's wound and our suspicions. If we go to the sheriff without solid evidence, Coleman will just dismiss us again. And if we accuse the Halsteads without being absolutely certain, they could make things very difficult for you." "So what do we do?" Kieran's winter sky eyes were hard as flint. "We set a trap. We let them think they have another chance to steal from you, and this time we catch them red-handed." The plan was risky but simple. They spread word around town that Lily and Samuel would be attending a dance at the church social hall the following Saturday night, a rare social event that would keep them away from the ranch for several hours. They made sure to mention it loudly and repeatedly, ensuring that anyone who was watching would know the ranch would be unguarded. But of course, it would not actually be unguarded. Kieran would be hidden in the barn, waiting and watching. And Lily, despite claiming to be at the dance, would be concealed in the hayloft with her rifle, ready to provide cover if things went wrong. Samuel argued fiercely against the plan, insisting that he should be the one in hiding rather than going to the dance. But Kieran was firm. "If the thieves are watching, they will expect to see you at the dance," he explained patiently. "Lily, they might believe, would skip it since she does not attend many social events. But you are 16, Samuel. People will notice if you are not there, and they will get suspicious." "I do not like leaving you both here alone," Samuel said stubbornly. "We will not be alone," Lily reminded him. "We will have each other, and we will be fine, I promise." Samuel finally, reluctantly, agreed. On Saturday evening, he dressed in his good clothes and rode into town with several of the neighboring families, playing his part perfectly. Lily watched him go with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Her little brother was growing up, becoming the kind of man their father would have been proud of. As darkness fell, Lily took up her position in the hayloft. The night was clear and warm, with a sliver of moon providing just enough light to see by. From her vantage point, she could see most of the ranch yard and the pasture beyond. Somewhere below, she knew Kieran was hidden in the barn, watching and waiting just as she was. The hours crept by slowly. Lily's legs cramped from staying still, and she fought against drowsiness. Maybe they had been wrong. Maybe the thieves would not come after all. Then, just past midnight, she saw them. 4 riders this time, moving quietly along the fence line just as they had before. Her heart began to pound. This was it. The riders dismounted at the fence, and Lily recognized Jake Morrison even in the darkness. The other 3 were less familiar, but she thought one of them might be Edmund Halstead's son, Richard. Her hands tightened on her rifle. Now, Kieran's voice rang out from the barn, and suddenly lanterns blazed to life all around the yard. Kieran emerged from the barn with his pistol drawn, and Lily stood up in the hayloft, her rifle aimed steadily at the thieves. "Do not move," Lily shouted. "We have you surrounded." For a frozen moment, no one moved. Then Morrison reached for his gun, and everything happened at once. Lily fired, deliberately shooting to wound, and Morrison's gun went spinning from his hand as he howled in pain. The other thieves scattered, two of them diving for cover, while the third, the one Lily thought was Richard Halstead, tried to mount his horse. Kieran was faster. He grabbed Richard's collar and yanked him bodily from the saddle, sending him sprawling in the dust. "Stay down," Kieran commanded, his pistol leveled. "You cannot do this," Richard sputtered, his cultured accent slipping into something uglier. "My father will have you both thrown in jail." "Your father will do no such thing," a new voice said, and Lily's head whipped around to see Sheriff Coleman riding into the yard with Samuel and 3 other deputies. "Not when we have all these witnesses to what you have been doing." Relief flooded through Lily so intensely she felt dizzy. Samuel must have convinced the sheriff to come, must have made him understand the seriousness of what was happening. Her little brother had come through when it mattered most. The thieves were arrested and taken into custody, Morrison cursing all the way. Richard Halstead maintained a sullen silence, but his guilt was written plain on his face. As the deputies hauled them toward town, Sheriff Coleman lingered behind, looking uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology, Miss Catherine," he said gruffly. "I should have taken your complaints more seriously from the start. I let my own pride get in the way of doing my job properly." Lily was so surprised she almost could not speak. Sheriff Coleman admitting he was wrong was something she had never expected to witness. "I appreciate that, Sheriff," she managed, "and I appreciate you coming tonight." "Thank your brother," Coleman said. "That boy is persistent as a tick. He would not leave me alone until I agreed to come out here and see what was happening." He tipped his hat. "You have a good evening, Miss Catherine. Mr. Zachary." When the sheriff had gone, the 3 of them stood in the ranch yard, looking at each other in the flickering lantern light. Then Samuel let out a whoop of triumph and threw his arms around Lily, squeezing her so tight she could barely breathe. "We did it," Samuel crowed. "We actually caught them." "You did it," Lily corrected, hugging him back fiercely. "You convinced the sheriff to come. How did you manage that?" Samuel grinned, looking more like the boy he used to be before their father died. "I told him that if he did not come and something bad happened, every person in town would know that he let it happen because he was too stubborn and proud to listen to a woman. Figured that would get his attention." "Smart thinking," Kieran said, and the approval in his voice made Samuel stand a little straighter. They went inside and Lily made coffee, her hand still shaking slightly with leftover adrenaline. They sat around the kitchen table and talked through everything that had happened, piecing together the full picture. The Halsteads had been behind the thefts, just as they suspected, trying to drive Lily into financial ruin so she would be forced to sell the ranch cheaply. It had been Richard's idea, apparently, a way to impress his father and prove he could be ruthless in business. "What will happen to them?" Samuel asked. "Jail time, certainly," Kieran said, "and the Halstead reputation will be destroyed. Edmund might not have known what his son was doing, but people will assume he did. They will not be able to hold their heads up in this town again." Lily felt a complicated mix of emotions. She had never wanted to destroy anyone, only to protect what was hers. But the Halsteads had made their choice when they decided to steal from her family. "I need some air," she said abruptly, standing up. "Samuel, you should get to bed. It has been a long night." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but Kieran gave him a meaningful look and he subsided. "All right." "Good night, Lily," Good night, Kieran. After Samuel had gone upstairs, Lily stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She heard the door open behind her and knew without looking that it was Kieran. "You did well tonight," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "We did well," Lily corrected. "I could not have managed any of this without you." "I think you could have," Kieran said. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Lily Catherine. You can shoot straighter than the sheriff. You run this ranch better than most men twice your age, and you have raised your brother to be a fine young man. You do not need anyone." Lily turned to look at him, at those winter sky eyes that had become so dear to her over the past weeks. "Maybe I do not need anyone," she said softly, "but that does not mean I do not want someone." The air between them went very still. Kieran reached up slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hands. "I need a partner exactly like you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Someone brave and true and beautiful inside and out. I know I am just a drifter with no money and no prospects, but I swear to you, Lily, if you give me a chance, I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Lily whispered. And then she was kissing him, pouring all the loneliness and longing and hope she had been carrying into that kiss. Kieran's arms came around her, strong and sure, and Lily felt like she had finally come home after a long journey she had not even known she was taking. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kieran was smiling in a way that transformed his whole face. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That is absolutely a yes," Lily confirmed, and kissed him again just to make sure he understood. They were married 6 weeks later, on a bright October morning when the leaves were turning gold and the air had the first crisp bite of autumn. Samuel stood up with Kieran as his best man, looking proud and only a little emotional. Half the town came to the ceremony, curious to see the woman who had outshot the sheriff marry the mysterious drifter who had helped her catch the Halstead thieves. Edmund Halstead and his family had left town in disgrace after Richard's trial. The Halstead ranch had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution, and the money had been distributed among the ranchers they had been stealing from. Lily's portion had been enough to hire 2 new ranch hands and make some much-needed repairs to the property. As Lily stood in the little church and promised to love and honor Kieran for the rest of her days, she thought about how much had changed in just a few short months. She had been alone and struggling, worn down by work and worry. Now she had a partner, someone who saw her as an equal and valued her strength rather than being threatened by it. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and music provided by a fiddle player from town. People danced and ate and celebrated into the evening, and Lily felt her heart swell with happiness as she watched Samuel laughing with friends his own age, finally allowed to be young again now that the burden of protecting the ranch had been lifted from his shoulders. "Happy?" Kieran asked, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. "Impossibly happy," Lily confirmed. "I did not think this was possible for me. I thought I would just work and worry and eventually grow old alone." "Never alone," Kieran promised. "I am here and I am not going anywhere." They spent their wedding night in the main house, in the room that had once been her parents'. Lily had worried it might feel strange, but instead it felt right, like a circle being completed. Kieran was gentle and patient and loving, and when Lily woke the next morning wrapped in his arms, she felt more content than she could ever remember feeling. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Lily handling the finances and strategic decisions while Kieran managed the daily work and the hired hands. They made a formidable team, each complementing the other's strengths. Samuel grew into a fine young man and eventually started his own small ranch on the eastern edge of their property, close enough to help when needed but far enough to be independent. In the spring of 1875, Lily gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Thomas after her father. Kieran wept when he held his son for the first time, and Lily fell in love with him all over again, watching the tenderness with which he cradled the tiny infant. 2 years later came a daughter they named Rose, with her father's winter sky eyes and her mother's determination. She was barely walking before she was demanding to be taken out to see the horses, and by the age of 5, she could ride better than some of the ranch hands. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick and fences that needed constant mending. But through it all, Lily and Kieran faced every challenge together, partners in the truest sense of the word. On their 10th anniversary, Kieran surprised Lily with a gift. It was a shadow box frame, and inside was the shattered remains of the glass bottle she had shot that first day in the town square, carefully preserved. "So you never forget," Kieran said, "that you can shoot straighter than the sheriff, and that was the day my whole life changed." Lily traced the glass fragments gently, remembering that hot August day when a stranger had looked at her with admiration instead of dismissal, had seen her strength and wanted to be part of it rather than diminish it. "My whole life changed that day too," she said softly. "I just did not know it yet." They stood together on the porch they had rebuilt 3 times over the years, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set in glorious shades of orange and pink. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and partnership. "You ever miss it?" Lily asked suddenly. "The traveling, the freedom to just pick up and go wherever you wanted." Kieran pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not even for a second," he said firmly. "This right here, you and the children and this life we have built together, this is everything I never knew I was looking for. This is home." As the years continued to pass, that sense of home only deepened. They added on to the house to accommodate their growing family, with another son named James born in 1879 and a second daughter, Margaret, in 1882. The children grew up strong and capable, learning to ride and rope and shoot from both parents. Thomas proved to have his mother's gift for marksmanship, and by the time he was 15 he could hit targets that would make grown men shake their heads in amazement. Rose had her father's way with horses, and could gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and time. James was quieter than his siblings, preferring books to broncos, and Lily encouraged his education enthusiastically, remembering how her own father had valued learning. Little Margaret was still young, but she showed signs of having inherited both her parents' stubbornness and determination in equal measure. Samuel married a schoolteacher named Emily and had 3 children of his own. The two families remained close, gathering every Sunday for dinner and helping each other through the inevitable difficulties of ranch life. Samuel never forgot that Kieran had helped save the family ranch, and the 2 men developed a friendship that went beyond their connection through Lily. Sheriff Coleman eventually retired, and a new sheriff was elected who had considerably more respect for both Lily's capabilities and women's rights in general. The town of St. Louis continued to grow and change, evolving from a rough frontier settlement into a more established community with schools and churches and proper streets. Through it all, Lily and Kieran's love remained constant. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still worked side by side, partners in every sense, and they still looked at each other with the same wonder and appreciation that had sparked between them that first day in the town square. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house rang with laughter and music, with children running underfoot and adults swapping stories. Lily stood in the kitchen preparing food and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had built. "You look thoughtful," Kieran said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," Lily said, leaning back against him. "20 years ago, I was so tired and scared and alone. I thought my whole life would be nothing but struggle and worry. And then you rode into town and everything changed." "You changed it," Kieran corrected gently. "You were brave enough to ask for help. You were strong enough to trust a stranger. You were smart enough to see that we could be partners. I just had the enormous good fortune to be in the right place at the right time." Lily turned in his arms to face him, looking up at the face she knew better than her own. Silver threaded through Kieran's dark hair now, and lines crinkled around his eyes from years of squinting against the sun. But those winter sky eyes were the same, looking at her with the same love and admiration they always had. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Kieran replied, and kissed her there in their kitchen with their family celebrating around them and their life stretching out full of promise and possibility. As the evening wore on and the party continued, Lily stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars she had looked at all those years ago when she had been struggling to keep the ranch running and feeling like she was drowning in responsibility. But now, when she looked at them, she did not feel overwhelmed. She felt peaceful, content, complete. The door opened behind her and she smiled, knowing it would be Kieran. He came to stand beside her, taking her hand in his. "The children want you to come inside," he said. "Thomas made a speech about how grateful he is to have such strong parents to learn from, and now Rose is demanding you tell the story about how we met." "Again," Lily laughed. "She must have heard that story 100 times, and she will want to hear it 100 more," Kieran said fondly. "It is her favorite." They walked back inside together, hand in hand, to their family and their home and the life they had built through love and partnership and trust. And as Lily launched into the familiar story, watching her children's faces light up, she thought about how a single moment of bravery could change everything. She had shot straighter than the sheriff and caught the attention of a cowboy who saw her strength as something to admire rather than fear. That cowboy had said he needed a partner exactly like her, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. Years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew into a man and took over much of the day-to-day ranch management, learning everything his parents could teach him about running the operation successfully. Rose surprised everyone by falling in love with a horse trader from Kansas City and moving away, though she visited often and always brought exciting stories of her travels. James went east to university, fulfilling Lily's dreams of giving her children opportunities for education, and eventually became a lawyer. Margaret proved to be as gifted with numbers as her mother, taking over the ranch's accounts with meticulous precision. Through births and deaths, triumphs and setbacks, Lily and Kieran remained each other's constant support. When Kieran's father died, Lily held him through his grief. When Lily broke her leg in a riding accident, Kieran nursed her back to health with patient care. They celebrated their children's achievements and comforted them through their failures, always presenting a united front of love and support. Samuel and Emily's children grew up alongside Lily and Kieran's, the cousins as close as siblings. The expanded family became something of a legend in St. Louis, known for their loyalty to each other and their willingness to help neighbors in need. The Kieran Zachary name meant something in the community, representing integrity and hard work, and the kind of partnership marriage should be. On their 30th anniversary, their children organized a surprise celebration, inviting everyone they had ever known. The party filled the ranch yard and spilled out into the pastures, with 3 generations of family and friends gathered to honor the couple who had shown them all what true partnership looked like. Lily stood with Kieran's arm around her waist, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt tears of happiness blur her vision. She thought about the frightened, exhausted young woman she had been at 24, trying so hard to be strong enough for everyone who depended on her. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that help was coming in the form of a tall stranger with winter sky eyes who would see her exactly as she was and love her for it. "What are you thinking?" Kieran murmured in her ear. "That I would not change a single thing," Lily replied honestly. "Every struggle, every hardship, every moment of fear and doubt, it was all worth it because it led me here. To you, to our family, to this life. Even the cattle thieves," Kieran teased gently. "Especially the cattle thieves," Lily said with a laugh. "If they had not forced me to ask for help, I might have been too stubborn to ever let you into my life." "True," Kieran acknowledged. "You were impressively stubborn." "Was," Lily raised an eyebrow. "Past tense." "Are," Kieran corrected with a grin. "You are impressively stubborn. It is one of the many things I love about you." They danced together as the sun set, moving to music played by their grandchildren and surrounded by everyone they loved. Lily rested her head on Kieran's shoulder, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart, and thought that this was what happiness looked like. Not a single perfect moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together like pearls on a string, each one precious because it was shared. As they grew older, Lily and Kieran gradually handed more responsibilities over to Thomas and Margaret, though they never fully retired. The ranch was in their blood, and they could not imagine not being part of its daily rhythms. They still rose early to watch the sunrise, still walked the fence lines checking for damage, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. Their love became something of a local legend. Young couples would ask them for advice, wanting to know the secret to such a long and happy marriage. Kieran would always say the same thing. "Find someone who makes you want to be better," he would tell them. "Someone who sees your strengths and celebrates them, who supports your weaknesses and helps you overcome them. Find a true partner, not just a spouse." Lily's advice was equally consistent. "Marry someone who respects you," she would say. "Someone who listens when you speak and values your opinions. Someone who makes you laugh even when times are hard. And for heaven's sake, make sure they can work as hard as you can, because building a life together takes effort from both people." On their 40th anniversary, Lily and Kieran sat together on their porch in the gentle twilight, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once run. They were in their 60s now, their hair silver and their bodies slower than they once were, but the love between them had only deepened with time. 40 years, Lily mused. "When I was 24, I could not imagine being 64. It seemed impossibly old and far away. And now?" Kieran asked. "Now it feels like we are just getting started," Lily said with a smile, "like there is still so much more to do and see and experience together." "Good," Kieran said firmly, "because I plan on having at least 40 more years with you." "At least," Lily agreed, and they sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars come out one by one. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Spring brought new calves and the back-breaking work of branding and castrating. Summer meant long days of mending fences and moving herds to fresh pasture. Fall was harvest time, preparing for the winter ahead. And winter, though quieter, brought its own challenges of keeping animals fed and healthy through cold and snow. Through it all, Lily and Kieran remained devoted to each other and to the land they had built their life upon. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, with Margaret's careful financial oversight ensuring they weathered economic downturns and dry years. Rose's children came to spend summers learning about ranch life, and James brought his own children to visit whenever his law practice allowed. Samuel and Emily celebrated their own milestone anniversaries, and the two couples would often sit together reminiscing about the early days, when they had all been young, and the future had seemed both terrifying and full of possibility. They remembered the night they caught the Halstead thieves, laughing now at memories that had once been frightening. "You should have seen Lily's face when she stood up in that hayloft," Samuel would say, "like an avenging angel with a rifle. And you should have seen Morrison's face when she shot the gun right out of his hand," Kieran would add. "I think he nearly fainted from shock." "I was trying not to faint myself," Lily would admit. "My hands were shaking so badly I am amazed I hit anything at all." "You could shoot straighter than the sheriff then," Kieran would say, pulling her close. "And you still can." These peaceful years were perhaps the sweetest of all. With the pressures of raising children and building the ranch eased, Lily and Kieran could simply enjoy each other's company. They took long rides across the property, not checking on anything in particular, but just experiencing the land they loved. They read to each other in the evenings, everything from newspapers to novels. They taught their grandchildren and great-grandchildren the skills they had spent a lifetime perfecting. On a particularly beautiful spring evening in 1903, 50 years after they had first met, Lily and Kieran renewed their wedding vows in a simple ceremony attended by their enormous extended family. Lily wore a dress the color of sage, and Kieran wore his best suit, and when they looked at each other and spoke the familiar words, there was not a dry eye among the witnesses. "I, Kieran Zachary, take you, Lily Catherine, to be my partner in all things," Kieran said, his voice still strong despite his 70 years. "To love and honor and cherish for whatever time we have left in this world and beyond." "I, Lily Catherine, take you, Kieran Zachary, to be my partner in all things," Lily repeated, her own voice steady and sure. "You saw me when I felt invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I felt unlovable. And you have made every single day of the past 50 years better than I ever dreamed my life could be." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the celebration that followed was talked about for years afterward as the greatest party St. Louis had ever seen. 5 decades of love, partnership, hard work, and devotion, celebrated by a family that had grown large and strong from the foundation those two people had built. As the years continued to advance, Lily and Kieran began to slow down more noticeably. Kieran developed arthritis in his hands, making it harder to do the detailed work he had once excelled at. Lily's eyesight began to fail, though she stubbornly refused to admit it until Kieran finally convinced her to get spectacles. But their minds remained sharp, and their love remained constant. They began to talk more about mortality, about what would happen when one of them inevitably passed before the other. These conversations were not morbid but practical, two partners planning for every contingency as they always had. "Promise me something," Lily said one evening as they sat watching another sunset. "If I go first, promise me you will not shut down. You will keep living, keep being part of this family we made." "Only if you promise the same," Kieran replied. "We built something beautiful here, Lily. Neither of us should let our grief destroy that if the other one passes." They held each other close, acknowledging the inevitable while refusing to let fear of it diminish the time they still had together. On a warm July day in 1908, 55 years after that fateful day in the town square, Kieran suffered a stroke while working in the barn. He lingered for 3 days, surrounded by family, drifting in and out of consciousness. Lily never left his side, holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of all the moments they had shared. On the 3rd day, in the quiet hours just before dawn, Kieran opened his eyes and looked at Lily with complete clarity. "Best decision I ever made," he said softly. "Coming to St. Louis that day, finding you." "Best decision I ever made too," Lily whispered through her tears. "Asking you to stay." "Partners," Kieran said, and it was both a statement and a question. "Partners," Lily confirmed. "Always and forever." Kieran smiled, squeezed her hand gently, and closed his eyes. He was gone before the sun rose, passing peacefully with the woman he loved holding him close. The grief was devastating, a physical pain that Lily felt in every part of her body, but she kept her promise to Kieran. She did not shut down or withdraw from life. Instead, she poured her energy into the family they had created, into the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. She told stories about Kieran constantly, keeping his memory alive and present. She showed the young ones how he had taught her to track, how he had moved with the horses, how he had always taken time to listen when someone needed to talk. She made sure they understood that the ranch they all enjoyed was built on the foundation of partnership and respect that she and Kieran had established. Lily lived for 7 more years after Kieran's death, remaining active and engaged despite her advancing age. She saw her great-great-grandchildren born, saw Thomas's son take over primary management of the ranch, saw the Kieran Zachary legacy extend into a 4th generation. On a peaceful autumn evening in 1915, 62 years after that hot August day when she had outshot the sheriff and caught a cowboy's attention, Lily Kieran Zachary passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 91 years old, and she had lived a life fuller and richer than she had ever imagined possible. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, from family members to neighbors to people whose lives she had touched in small ways over the decades. They told stories about her marksmanship, her business acumen, her fierce protection of family, her partnership with Kieran that had set an example for them all. They buried her next to Kieran under the oak tree they had planted together on their 10th anniversary. The tree had grown tall and strong, its branches spreading wide to provide shade, just as their love had grown and spread to shelter generations of family. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, was a simple inscription that Thomas had chosen. She could shoot straighter than the sheriff, and she found a partner exactly right for her. The ranch continued to thrive under family management, passed down through the generations with the same values of hard work, integrity, and partnership that Lily and Kieran had instilled. Their story became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of what 2 people could build together when they truly saw and valued each other as equals. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set in shades of gold and crimson, family members swore they could feel the presence of those 2 remarkable people, still watching over the land they had loved and the family they had created, partners still even in the great beyond. Their love story never truly ending but continuing in every generation that followed.